Dungeons & Dragons is a complex and dynamic game that gives players a lot of freedom and control when they're designing the types of characters that they want to be and who they want to play. One really critically defining aspect of these characters is race. The system of race is something which has gone under a relatively major overhaul in the last 6 months or so with the release of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, bringing in the lineage and the custom origin system to the game. And that's led a lot of people to be kind of wondering about what's the value, what's the point of actually having race in the game. Admittedly, I was inspired to start thinking about this after reading a couple of Reddit posts where some other players were discussing the value of having entire campaigns which were just created on the back of one singular race for all of their player characters. And this really kind of got me thinking and evaluating the merits of the race or possibly the lineage system moving into the future. So that's what I want to discuss today. Before we get into it, if you have not already, please do consider subscribing to the channel. It's a massive level of support and I sincerely appreciate every single one. And feel free to leave a comment and a like down below. Let me know what you guys are thinking about. What are your thoughts about this topic? I want to hear from you. All right, so this video is going to be a little bit different because it is going to be a little bit more of a discussion piece than any answer to a particular question. We're going to be kind of looking at some of the merits and the value that race brings to the game and maybe some of the tweaks and alternatives that other people have brought up. All right, so firstly, we need to take a look at what is the actual value of race? What does it bring to the game? So race has been a part of D&D for basically forever. And one of the things that it does provide, which can be incredibly beneficial, is some amount of aesthetic descriptors for your character. If you're a human or a tiefling or an orc or a dwarf, it's very, very easy to get a great, in an instant picture in your mind of what your character looks like and maybe some of their defining qualities or their defining features. And more importantly, from a character's developmental aspect, you're really able to kind of get a handle on what are the things that others might be picking up on. What do other people in this world that we know of, what do they know about humans or tieflings or dwarves? What do they think about them? What sort of things have they done in the past that they may be incredibly supportive of or that they might be incredibly frustrated with? You know, the general way that drow are perceived within the Forgotten Realms is drastically different to the way that elves are perceived in the Forgotten Realms. And this kind of ties really neatly into the next point. Not only does it provide some great aesthetic descriptors for your characters, but it also can provide some contextual cues for some background information. It's able to give understanding or some context for maybe why your dwarf spent a lot of time as a blacksmith or why your elf is a ranger. It's also able to provide deep elements of your backstory. The defining moments of a lot of characters are actually tied specifically to their race. And maybe that can feel a little bit cheap or contrived, but it really doesn't have to be. The point of race is to be able to give you the sort of building block for where your character came from, who they are, what types of things they're good or bad at, and maybe that's a really big aspect of why they're so different and why they are adventuring in this band of strange heroes, why they haven't spent a time maybe taking up the heir to the throne where they once lived. Not only can your race serve as a great starting point for a lot of plot hooks for your characters, but developmentally can also serve as some of the most defining and powerful moments that occur throughout the course of your campaign. Maybe you're breaking with tradition, maybe you're returning back to an ancestral home and defying them in every way, or maybe you're completely overriding and changing the course of history with some of your actions. There are incredible moments that can take place given the context of race that exists in the game. You can also completely change the narrative experience of NPCs and the characters that you might encounter in the various towns and cities and dungeons. You have great power and flexibility to be able to actually have some influence over those things. All right, so within the context of D&D 5e, what are the problems that we're looking at with race? And to be honest, there are kind of a few. So these types of problems are not specific to every single campaign. They will largely depend on the type of player that you are, the type of DM that you have, the type of campaign setting that you're actually playing within. But in general, these are some of the overriding problems that we have seen in my own games as well as through reading a lot of different stories online. So there's the obvious problem of the power gamer. They're going to pick the ASMR because they want to be able to fly at third level, even if this type of an exotic race doesn't make any contextual sense within your campaign. I mean, at that kind of point, it does largely fall into the DM to be able to say that yes, you can or you can't. But again, you don't necessarily want to be stripping that level of power away from your players unless that's something you've already all agreed upon. Your power gamer is effectively just going to pick the best race in any given circumstance, no matter kind of what you say. So you're not really going to be able to win that one. Another one of the problems that gets brought up all the time is the certain prevalence of exotic races that exist within the Forgotten Realms typical campaign settings. I don't really know that this is necessarily a problem. Dungeons & Dragons is a game pretty much entirely built on the notion of suspending belief. You have people who are casting spells and communicating with the dead and hitting 4 things with a sword in one turn. Like, that's all incredibly and unbelievable stuff. Is it really so hard to believe that you have this large sort of compendium of exotic races all converging in a city like Waterdeep? Is it really that hard to believe that a city like that could be some kind of cosmopolitan metropolis where a ton of different races can coexist? But on a little bit of a smaller scale, it's more about how do these exotic races get together, and why are they adventuring, and why are they friendly to each other? How do the Drow or the Dwarf and the Tabaxi and your Aasimar, how do they all get together, and why are they on the same path? Does that necessarily make sense given their broadly divergent backgrounds? And truthfully, I'd say, yeah, it absolutely can, but the problem is a lot of that does rely on RP and actually kind of getting involved in it if that's something that you care about. It can be really easy for the sort of how and the why to get incredibly lost without any of that sort of development. From my opinion and the experience in my games, I find that the exploration of backgrounds and that deep consideration of the how and the why can really bring an incredible level of depth and satisfaction to the game that you wouldn't have otherwise. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily make sense, but it definitely can if you want it to. So another thing that I have seen discussed online is the idea that a lot of DMs will have their players sort of forced to select one race. All players in their campaign must be of the same race. A lot of times they pick humans, especially for campaigns like Curse of Strahd. It's incredibly common to pick specifically human characters. And this can actually make a lot of sense and make a campaign really, really intriguing, because it does kind of force you to think about different aspects and maybe different plot hooks and development timelines for your characters. But I do kind of believe this falls more into the category of manufactured depth and sort of artificial complexity. And the reason that I think that is because it kind of does force your players to be developing interesting characters while completely dismissing the idea that an origin can actually be incredibly compelling for a player specifically. What's interesting for your DM might be something that's completely opposite to something that's interesting for one of your players. So I think it's incredibly important that if you're going to be running one of these campaigns or involved in one of these campaigns, you definitely need to have that discussion with the entire group to kind of figure out what's actually, what is driving everyone, what are the motivations for your character, and make sure that they don't have some concept that's really tied up and defined by perhaps some kind of an exotic race. So I guess overall, I don't really have a problem with the way that race exists in Dungeons & Dragons. I do think that we have taken a huge step forward with the introduction of the lineage system and the custom origins. I think this is an incredible thing that separates a lot of the aesthetic defining characters from their actual features and capabilities, and is able to kind of converge it into one system that works really, really neatly in an incredible way. Combined with the fact that these systems don't strip you and your character of the feeling of some kind of a defined origin, where they came from, doesn't really put it all onto you to figure it out. And it also doesn't just feel as generic as, oh, I'm just another human X or human Y from whatever town in the Forgotten Realms. Maybe this is something that we might see get further iterated on and developed into a 5.5 or a Dungeons & Dragons 6th edition at some point in the future. Maybe we shift a little bit closer to a system, something like exists within Pathfinder, where you're selecting specific feats based on origins, and that could add some level of complexity without stripping your character of the feeling of being tied to a specific origin or a region within the world or any plane. Alright guys, so that's been it. As I said, this is definitely a little bit of a different kind of video than I've done in the past, so please let me know what you think about it. Leave me a comment down below and a like, and please, if you do enjoy this type of content, remember to subscribe. It does sincerely help, and I appreciate absolutely every single one. But other than that, take care.